Everyone's streaming in now.
Yeah.
Are we live?
We are live. I'm just getting the slides up.
Okay. Someone commented, Steve, that your background is pretty nice.
I'll reply.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to the lunch chat with Steve Melhuish, founder of PropertyGuru. This session is specially organized by the Virtual Growth Conference, Zen Code, and Singapore Global Network, SGN. Thank you very much for tuning in this afternoon. I'm Koi from SGN and your host for today. SGN is a new team under the Singapore Economic Development Board. We connect with our fellow Singaporeans abroad and friends across the globe to Singapore. Over the past 1 year, we are very grateful to everyone who has played a unique role in contributing to building this network. In fact, SGN just celebrated our first birthday last week, and we look forward to exciting days ahead as we introduce more friends onto our network. And now coming back to the start of today's session, we are very honored to have Steve with us, and I'd like to share some interesting snippets before we begin the session proper. As an accomplished entrepreneur and business leader, Steve supported the development of Singapore and Southeast Asia's startup ecosystem over the last decade. He has 28 years of experience building businesses, including 3 startups, most recently PropertyGuru, a profitable and our very own homegrown tech unicorn. He is also an angel investor and advisor to 20 over startups and a VC partner. So in 2007, Steve co-founded PropertyGuru. He led the business as CEO for the first 11 years, growing it from 2 people, with just an idea, into a regional platform used by 25 million users monthly and over 1,200 staff in 5 countries. Today, Steve continues to contribute to the company's strategy and governance as board of director. I would now like to invite Steve to share more about the exciting things he's involved in. Steve, the time is yours.
Thank you, Koi. I guess, am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. Benson, are you gonna kickstart, or shall I? Do you want me to go ahead?
Oh no, just introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. I guess Koi's done a fantastic job, and happy birthday also to SGN. And as you can see, I'm sitting outside enjoying the phase 2 freedom, sitting on the beach in Sentosa. And I'm very, very happy to be here. Just a little bit about my background. I'm originally an army brat, so I as a child, growing up, I moved around every couple of years with a new home, a new school, and new friends. And no doubt that had some kind of emotional scarring on me in later life. I spent the first 10 years of my career in telecommunications, which was in the sort of 90s into the early 2000s, which was really exciting times, just as the dot-com boom was happening, the first dot-com boom was happening, and telecoms and dot-com boom was very much interlinked. It was fascinating times. I learned a huge amount during those years. as we saw, cable TV moving to more online. We saw content and mobile companies and internet companies rising, and markets liberalizing, so telecoms markets liberalizing. It was so very exciting times. And then in the early 2000s, obviously dot-com bust happened, and I then spent some time dismantling my team every 6 months and reducing my headcount every 6 months. It was quite a painful process to go through personally, and also quite emotional with some of the team members, of course. And I realized I actually enjoyed building things rather than dismantling things at that point. I took 6 months off and traveled around Southeast Asia, which is where I guess the love for Asia really came to play. And I came back and I ended up with a Post-it note on my wall which said Digital Asia Startup. And I was very excited about this, and I was determined to go and build a Digital Asia startup business in real Asia, which for me meant going to China. So I was talking to VCs, venture capital companies and startups in China. And then my wife's company offered her a role in Singapore, and we went, oh no, Singapore is so boring. We don't want to go to Singapore. We want to go to real Asia and do real stuff. And that was 15 years ago, and we're still here and very happy to be here. And Singapore's been just fantastic for me and my family over the last 15 years. And yeah, so during those early years, I started angel investing and helping some startups. I came to Singapore. Was a little bit disappointed then about the startup scene, but ended up investing in a company and then helping build and run that company for a while. And then 2007, obviously, I started PropertyGuru. And today, I'm still on the board of PropertyGuru. I've continued my angel investing with about 21 companies. Venture partner with Wavemaker, which is one of the large VCs in the region. And also focusing a lot of my time now on sustainability, so climate and social impact.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Now, may I introduce our moderator for today, Mr. Benson Lau, is the co-founder and chief strategy officer of ZenCode and founder of the Virtual Growth Conference, VGC. Benson is now based in ZenCode's Hong Kong office, where he has grown ZenCode from humble beginnings to 4 offices in Asia with 80 over staff in the last 5 years. He has extensive experience in web and mobile applications development, and as well as artificial neural networks. Especially working with offshore developmental teams, Benson is also the tech advisor to some VCs and family offices to validate technology, especially in AI and applications. Benson is an advocate for the need to implement social impact, even in his own organization and the startups he worked with. Now, without further ado, may I now invite Benson to share more about ZenCode as well as VGC. Benson, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Koi. Again, really well done on the introduction. Generally for us, ZenCode, we formed about 5 years ago in Singapore. We love Singapore for its environment and how it helped us grow. I think we were lucky in that way because by then, when Steve had been there about 10 years, we came in when all the support was there. So thank you very much, Steve, for that. But yeah, we've grown the company. We focus really on software development services, especially with startups and enterprise clients. And we've grown to really look at deeper problems to solve. If we can apply AI in those problems, especially around natural language processing. So if you know anyone that's looking for that kind of service, we're really keen to see if we can solve problems together. Virtual Growth really started at about 6 months back because at that time, when the lockdown happened, I was planning an event called FailCon in Hong Kong. And ironically, I guess we failed to organize that for this year. But yes, we organized it the previous year, and that was great. But I was thinking, hey, how do we continue this conversation? So I started Virtual Growth, asking entrepreneurs, investors around the world to really contribute in terms of giving advice to startups, especially in Hong Kong and the Greater China region, so that they can understand and grow and succeed. Yeah. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Benson. I thought I should also take this opportunity to share with everyone that Benson, Zenco, and VGC we have been good friends and long-time friends. We have collaborated on a few projects together. Benson has been amazing, always introducing us to his friends like Steve. So I'm very happy to be partnering Benson once again for today's session. And now I thought I would just share a little bit more about today's program before we begin the session proper between Benson and Steve. So today's program is very succinct, it's very tight-knitted. So we have a very short sharing, a discussion between Benson and Steve, followed by a Q&A session. I'm sure many of you already have questions in mind you'd like to ask Steve. So there'll be ample time for you to do that. And before, we also like to inform you that this session is recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube for your instant replay after that. So video, audio, and screen sharing functions have been turned off for all attendees. And so yeah, we really love questions. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to post any questions you might have to Steve. And we are operating under the Chatham House rules today. So this means that attendees like yourself are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any other participants may be reviewed, so that everyone can speak freely, respectively, as well as enjoy the session today. And now, without further ado, I will now hand the session to Benson to kickstart today's discussion. Benson, over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Koi. And thanks, Steve, for being here. Really appreciate your time. And just really, when I reached out to you, I was really interested in speaking with you because of how you grew a startup business from something really, with a limited amount of resources to where you are today. Maybe you could walk us through a little bit about that first 10 clients. What happened and how did you get there?
Yeah, always getting clients is hard, particularly if you want them to pay. That's even harder. Yeah, we made the decision that right at the very start that we would focus on monetizing the business and building a revenue generating profitable company. Obviously, if you don't have the brand or the reach, that's obviously quite a tall order. I guess the challenge that we had initially was we were a brand new business in 2007. We were running on fumes, it was bootstrap business. Myself and my co-founder put $300,000 into the company initially. And we were working, for free and, trying to get people to come and join us a little bit. So we had limited resources. And we had a fairly scrappy product, which wasn't great. We had some property listings on the website, which were in some cases for rent when they should have been for sale, and for sale when they should have been for rent, and $5,000 versus $500,000. So we had a lot of issues in the early stages of the product. I remember, my partner was very much focused around the operations and the product and technology side of the business, and I was more focused on the sales and marketing. And so when it came to persuading customers that they should pay and they should join us on this platform they've never heard of, it was down to me. And so I recall very, very vividly the very first sales pitch that I did, which was to a group of real estate agents from one of the agencies called Dennis Wee Group. And I was presenting to about 50 real estate agents. And the one challenge I had was I was brand new to real estate. I'd broken my rule that I would never, start a business in an area that I didn't really know that well, but I did in the real estate space. So I was presenting on PropertyGuru to these 50 real estate agents. And the challenge I had was, one, I didn't really understand their business. Two, I was speaking English as a Brit. A lot of the agents were not speaking English as a first language. And I was talking about this thing called digital marketing or online marketing in 2007. Now, while Singapore looked like a high-tech, high broadband penetration market, the adoption of internet was relatively low in those days. And every single real estate agent, every single real estate developer, and every single property buyer was using the newspapers. The newspapers were thick with all the property advertisements in them. And I'd come along and said, look, everybody, now's the time for you to move online and generate your sales leads and transactions from buyers who are online. And I was met with huge amount of skepticism and confusion, you know, because you're trying to change a behavior that had existed for 20, 30, 40 years to now say move online. So that it was extremely hard. So what we did was we had a limited free service, but we also had the ability for just $50 to be able to advertise on the site, and your listings would then be at the top, and you could put as many photographs as you want on there, as much description as you want, and you can control the information that's on there, and therefore get more prioritized leads. And so a relatively low friction point, $50. Most people had $50 in their wallet or their purse. And so we signed up, I think 5 people that session, and subsequent sessions was kind of similar. And so it wasn't until after sort of about 18 months of going through this process where we started to then get a network effect, where agents were advertising, they were making transactions, they were generating thousands of dollars every month, and they were telling their colleagues, and it's quite a small network. And so it very quickly spread, so that by the end of the first year, we had 1,000 paying agents, and then we had 4,000 the second year and 10,000 the third year. And now it's about 50,000 agents who are advertising on the site. So yeah, it was challenging to say the least.
Right. And how did you, the other question I usually ask is, you met your co-founder and you started the business together. But
Yeah.
how did you choose your partner? What qualities were you looking for, and what made you think he was a good fit?
Yeah, I wish it was a scientific process, an analytical process, but it was absolute luck. You know, I had been running this mobile content company. I wanted to build PropertyGuru. I put together a business plan. I pitched it to an investor friend of mine, and he said, "Look, I know someone who's interested in this space." And he then introduced me to my co-founder. So I didn't know him. He was a Finnish guy who'd gone to INSEAD, and he was dating, now married with a kid, a real estate agent. And so through his relationship with her, I was interested in what she was going through. He had inside knowledge about how a real estate agent was behaving and the challenges they faced. And he is a coder, and he was working in India 5 days a week, and then commuting back to Singapore at the weekends, and doing IT consultancy. And so we said, okay, let's start working on this together part-time. And so in May 2007, we started working part-time, and then by about October, we went full-time. And we were very, very fortunate, because despite the fact that, if you do a Myers-Briggs 8 quadrants, psychometric analysis, we are polar opposites in every regard. And that can either make or break a relationship, I guess. I didn't realize that at the time, but actually, it was a very solid foundation and very complementary. And so whilst he and I disagreed on many, many occasions, on many, many issues, when it was fundamental issues about the strategy and the vision and the values of the company, we were very aligned. And in certain cases, my partner Yanni would take the lead because it was more playing to his strengths. Other times it was playing to my strengths. So things like fundraising and sales, marketing, business development was down to me. But ops, product and technical was very much down to him. We 5 days a week, we would go and do our day jobs. And at the weekends, we would spend the time to sort of strategize and share notes and then go back to our day job effectively. So it worked very well, but it was a little bit about luck. But I think the lesson learned for me around that was, if I did it again, then it would be focused very much around what's the vision. Do you have a common vision? So when the going gets tough, as it did, we were, it was challenging the first 5 or 6 years, extremely challenging. Then what binds you together to make the sensible decision? If you have a common vision and you have aligned values, then you can have a positive outcome.
Right, I understand on that. And when you first did your hiring, I guess you had to also make sure that the employees shared that same vision. So how did you pick the right employees at the start?
Again, I think I'd like to say that we had a very, very clear matrix and a very strict approach to culture and values. But to be frank, in the early days of the business, talent's remained an issue throughout the whole journey, to be honest. And it's the biggest challenge a startup faces, but for different reasons. So early days, talent is a real issue because you don't have a brand, you don't have any money, you don't have any credibility, you don't have an office. We had a tiny shop house, and we had crammed people in there and power trips every 2 hours, and it was not particularly pleasant working condition. And so the ability to attract and retain talent was very, very hard. And therefore, we have to be a little bit creative, and you also have to be a little bit flexible. And that's what we did, So we hired, anyone we could, if they bought into the dream, So because we weren't paying a big salary and we weren't giving great benefits, we had to kind of talk a little bit about what business we were building and the dream and why we were doing it. Trying to make the market more transparent to help consumers navigate this property market, and take on the big Goliath, which was 100% of all of the property behavior was sitting in the newspapers, owned by a big government-linked organization, two government-linked organizations, and as we were coming in with no resources, no brands, there was a high-risk decision for anyone coming in. So we were a little bit creative in terms of paying high commissions to salespeople, providing share options to people, because that's all really we had in our ammunition other than the dream.
Right, I see.
Later on, when we started to have a few more resources, we could then focus a little bit more around performance management and also, culture fit. If you think about the sort of top grading, thinking about people who really, totally fit the values and the vision and totally fit the performance. That's kind of ideally where you're focusing. And maybe some people don't have the performance, you can coach them to go there. But in those early days, we had to be a bit more flexible.
Okay. Wow, that's tough.
Yeah.
And I guess you also had to then make sure that the company had enough finances to continue on. So I guess the first pitch you had was probably the most nerve-wracking. Could you talk us a bit about your experience then?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think the pitch piece was not so much nerve-wracking. I had spent, my background had been more sales and marketing. So I had been helping some startups around fundraising before. So I kind of had some experience around that. So I wasn't so concerned around that. The real challenge that we had, when we first started our fundraise, which was 2008, was the startup ecosystem, the venture capital environment was embryonic. And there was very little there. Essentially, there were a couple of angel matching schemes which provided sort of $50,000 to $200,000. There was SG Enterprise through their Seeds program was starting to think about a little bit more around online, but it was very, very embryonic. You didn't really have any of the big VCs in town. You had small mid-market private equity companies who were investing in more traditional mid-tier SMEs, I guess. But the venture industry was very small. You had a little bit of a fledgling angel community. So the challenge for us is really, how do we go about getting that first investing when it really wasn't a strong investment community? And so you basically have to go and just kiss a lot of frogs. You try and find the princess or the prince, by kissing these frogs. And that basically means just talking to everybody and anybody. So the Business Angels Network Southeast Asia was an existing group of angels. There were some small angel matching groups with SG Enterprise. So we spoke to a whole bunch, 20 or 30 different companies. And we were very fortunate. We finally got one group to match us with SG Enterprise at that stage. Went through 6 months process, and at the end of that, unfortunately, didn't work out because they wanted to renegotiate the valuation down from the 4 million to 3 million at that stage, and we weren't really happy about that. And so we went back to some of the original people who showed interest, and they all kept bandied together. So we ended up with effectively 5 or 6 individuals who scraped together $1.2 million. And they ended up being the seed money really that took us from our 300K bootstrap to the 1.2 million. And with that 1.2 million and also a debt facility, by 2009, we'd actually reach cash flow positive, and then 2010 we reached profitability. And it was at that point where we started to think a little bit about scaling outside of Singapore. So we built a strong strong business at that point. It was about 75% market share, and about 10 to 12,000 agents using us. And so that was when we then had to think about expanding, and also really more of a professional larger check from an investor.
Right. Cool. I'm sure that, at some point now you've reached success, but at some point, were there instances where it was almost, or could have been a failure point, and it was difficult to then move on? And how did you overcome those challenges?
There were, throughout the whole journey, there were numerous challenges. I think, in the early days, a lot of it was around the lack of scale and resources. So you had to kind of make things up as you go along, and be highly creative. I think for me, the biggest mistakes that we made, I guess, if you were to kind of group them together, was I think one around people. So we had issues with people. One individual had been with the business for a while, effectively stealing from the company. We had one country manager in Indonesia. We had 2 jobs. We had a couple of the sales guys who were responsible for 80% of the revenue, holding the company to ransom. We had a country manager in Malaysia who was funneling some of the marketing budget to his wife's company. And so these kind of challenges and mistakes in terms of hiring obviously have a big impact, not just on the business, but also on you. I mean, you're constantly faced with these challenges, and it's obviously an emotional roller coaster, day to day, week to week, from the highest highs to the lowest lows when you're faced with some of these problems. I remember very, very distinctly, the 2 sales guys. We were just going into fundraising process for the $50 million round in 2012, and the 2 sales guys basically said, "Look, double our salary or we're going." And when 80% of your revenue could potentially walk out the door, or so I thought, then you have to make some compromises, and we end up letting one go but keeping one, and then over time reducing that one person's power. So that was one lesson, and I guess challenge, and some mistakes we made. I think we completely underestimated the challenges of going international. And as a business to consumer business, which had at that stage 100% of the team, product, tech, finance, HR, customer services, sales, marketing, focused on the Singapore organization, which was growing at 2 or 3 times per annum, profitable, really, really nice business. And we said, okay, now we've conquered Singapore, we've got great business in Singapore. Now's the time to cut and paste and move into other markets. And we completely underestimated the challenges of going international, both in terms of organizational development. So, we took the salespeople in Singapore and asked them to help in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, the marketing people to help in Malaysia, to do the PR, the branding, the pricing, hiring salespeople, training those salespeople, developing a brand new platform for Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, mobile apps for consumers and on Android, and all at the same time, as well as keeping the Singapore business going at the same time. And the business grew from about 60 people to about 350 people overnight. We hired 200 plus people. We lost 200 plus people, and we had to rehire 200 plus people because we were just running. And in hindsight, we felt that we had to go fast. But in hindsight, I realize now we didn't have to go fast. At the time, we thought we would need to. And I realize that now, going from one country to multiple countries, particularly for a consumer business, is a lot more challenging. The organizational development, in other words, you need to then start to think about building a leadership team, a regional leadership team. You need to start thinking about delegation a lot more and accountability a lot more. Those were some of the lessons that we learned. We went from having mini CEOs in each country, but not paying them a mini CEO salary and expecting them to do a mini CEO's role. And of course, the person in Malaysia would do something in a certain way because they're more from a marketing background. The person in Indonesia maybe more from a finance background. They all do it a little bit different. And therefore you ended up having, 4 very different businesses on 4 different platforms because we just ran. We ran far too fast. And what I realize now is that, you know, things just take a little bit longer than you expect. So we thought if we didn't move now, we'd lose the opportunity. But had we waited 2 or 3 years and gone Singapore to Malaysia, Malaysia to Thailand, Thailand to Indonesia, or whatever, in a more phased manner, then you know, we could have still built a really, really strong business rather than stretching the whole organization to breaking point almost. You know, Singapore suffered for sure for that period of time because, you know, I was in Malaysia 48 times a year. And my partner was doing the same in Thailand, and I was trying to squeeze Indonesia in as well. And so the focus and attention obviously got reduced on the Singapore. And therefore Singapore morale suffered because that we were innovating and improving the website and launching new products and services all the time in Singapore. Suddenly the product and tech team are innovating and doing things for Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. The innovation in Singapore ground to halt, and therefore, you know, morale also in Singapore suffered a lot. And so, you know, we had some real challenges during that time, and that for me is a very raw scar. And so I take that with, you know, with my startups that I work with today, and, you know, and just share some of that sometimes when they're in a hurry to go from 1 country to 10 countries overnight. And certainly my experience has been, you know, having one very strong, profitable, fast-growing business is better than having 10 thin businesses or 10 pins on a map. Both from a business sustainability point of view, particularly in current times, but also, you know, just in terms of valuation of a business, etc., because sometimes they think otherwise. The other thing I think I learned, you know, a mistake that we made was we felt that, you know, we built a nice platform and user experience and product in Singapore. You could just cut and paste that platform into all the other markets. What we didn't realize, of course, is that, you know, consumers are different. The types of property is different and the behaviors is different. So in Singapore, most people will know the HDB estate, or they'll know the condo that they want to buy in. And they'll go to the HDB estate in the database, in a directory, or they'll go to the condo directory. Whereas in places like Thailand, you know, it's more about the neighborhood. It's about Sukhumvit or Siloam or Thong Lo, or it's about the BTS station. And so therefore maps became far more important. And so, you know, we didn't know that at the time. We learned the hard way and had to then effectively rebuild the front end, the user interface of the business.
Right. And now as an investor, I guess you have a different take on things and a different role to do. Maybe you could talk us a bit about some of the startups that you've invested in and what you are focusing your time on now. Sure.
Yeah, so, you know, in the last 2.5 to 3 years, I've, you know, transitioned, you know, I hired a CEO, and I was able to sort of transition out of the CEO role. And that was firstly spending some more time with my family, who I hadn't really spent much time with for 10 years, and also missed seeing the first 3 years of my kids grow up. So I have been angel investing, you know, on and off over the last 15 years. And I've invested in 21 companies, mostly in Asia, a big majority of those with HQ in Singapore. And you know, the thesis for that was, you know, I have some experience. I love building businesses. I know the challenges of growing, and I know how important it is to have someone just to bounce, a friendly founder, a fellow founder who can help you navigate that journey, and maybe share some of the experience and maybe accelerate some of the learning and reduce some of the pain. So, you know, in the early years of my angel investing, it was very much driven by 2 factors. One was the founder themselves, or the founders themselves, in terms of their passion, their energy, their desire to address a real pain point. You know, so what is the pain they're trying to address, and they're really fixated on trying to address that pain. Those were my kind of initial criteria. Over the last couple of years, it's been a lot more around sustainability. And so, you know, given what I've been witnessing over the last few years with the climate crisis drum beating louder and louder and louder, with, you know, record fires and forest fires and floods and record rain and record temperature after record temperature being broken, and that seemingly to accelerate, And as I started to dig in and research on this, I realized that actually, you know, the potential long-term impact on climate change is going to be global, and affect far larger group of people than COVID-19 is going to affect. You know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who will be displaced, who will have challenges with water, who will have challenges with food. And I realized that actually it's not going to really affect me so much. Yes, it might get a bit hotter where I'm living, but it's really going to affect the next generation, so my kids and their kids. And so I really embarked then on, you know, on a journey to try to see how we can help, you know, reduce this and tackle some of this in terms of reducing carbon emissions, capturing carbon, reducing food waste, you know, helping people get access to lower cost of renewable energy, and protecting maritime conservation, etc. So those have been the kind of the areas I've been investing in. So some of the companies, for example, include Lumitics, which is a food waste company, Capture, which is around tracking and reducing of CO2 emissions, Hydroleap is a clean water company, Amped is a company based in Hong Kong, who's electrifying construction sites, SoulShare, which is like a peer-to-peer solar energy sharing business in Bangladesh. You know, what else? A maritime conservation company called Zooblue. So a whole bunch of companies around that space. And also with my Wavemaker hat on, the Wavemaker Partners hat on, I'm investing and helping invest and support businesses which are more deep tech and in the B2B space. It's great fun. It's very rewarding. You know, I'm very, very fortunate and blessed. I get to work with some great founders who have a lot of energy and passion and desire to make the world a better place. I feel very, very fortunate that I have the ability to be able to work with some of these people and sit alongside them and learn from them as well. And it's been great fun.
Right, that's great. I'm just curious. You invest in some of the more like socially impactful startups versus deep tech startups. Would you say there's a difference in the success rate or the difference in the passion levels? And what would you say is the big key difference here?
At a fundamental level, I think, well, so when I look at the businesses that I'm working with, from a climate point of view, most of them are like they're essentially a venture company. They just happen to be solving, you know, trying to tackle the climate crisis in some way, either by reducing, you know, energy levels or reducing waste or trying to change some behaviors. They're essentially venture companies. But there are also some which are more sort of social enterprise. So I work with an organization called Impact Investment Exchange, started by, you know, an amazing woman called Doreen Shanaz. You know, a lot of the businesses that they're working with are, you know, social enterprises working in rural areas, you know, particularly women-led entrepreneurs, and they're having a huge impact on the local community, on local energy consumption. Also, renewable plays a big part of that as well. But maybe they're not going to be unicorns, some of these businesses, but they're going to have a huge impact on the community, on social, around financial inclusion, around gender inclusion. So when I look at that kind of business, I look at climate business, I think about what impacts they're having from a social point of view, what impacts they're having on the climate, and also what potential financial return could there be. But it's in that order. Whereas when you think about a deep tech or a B2B business, which is more around maybe fintech or education or around HR, then broadly speaking, it's, you know, financial return first, with sometimes a social byproduct. You know, like healthcare, for example, it might benefit some of the people who are on the bottom of the pyramid, maybe, or financial inclusion sometimes does also help people on the bottom of the pyramid as well. So broadly speaking, people hugely passionate, determined, hardworking, people working 7 days a week, 14-hour days, determined to improve the world somehow in the area they're working in, addressing a very real pain. It just happens to be in a different area. So I think the mechanics, the fundamentals inside are still the same. Just the purpose has been a little bit different.
Right.
I think the other issue is also access to capital. If you are a true venture company, access to capital is obviously a lot easier. If you are more of a social enterprise, access to capital is a lot harder. It's there's obviously a smaller pool of more impact investment money versus maybe venture or PE money today.
Right. And you see it as more important right now in the post-COVID-19 situation to be socially impactful, or do you think any startup that's starting now would have that mindset already?
Yeah, I think what's been really, obviously COVID-19 has been really hard, and it's been really hard for particularly people on the bottom of the pyramid, the day workers, construction workers. We've seen, it's really shone a light on some of the treatment of construction workers, and as a result of that, what we have seen is, the response has been pretty impressive, in terms of the flow of money, donations. The NVPC is a National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center in Singapore. I was chatting to Melissa Kui recently, and who runs that, and just saying, like, there's been a big step change in the amount of giving, both at a corporate level and also at a consumer level, as a result of COVID-19, and trying to help people in healthcare, in F&B, day workers, construction workers, people in hospitality, F&B. People have been most affected. Needy families. I've been working with a group called Gratitude COVID-19, or COVID-19 Gratitude, and they started this initiative. As a lady called Nisa Aparna and a few others started this amazing initiative recently in Singapore, which was called Mentor for Hope. And it brought together a whole bunch of VCs and entrepreneurs and founders on one side, and also struggling startups who are most affected by COVID-19, and matched them together in a mentoring session. So not only did it help the startups, but also as a byproduct of that was donations to some charities. So Willing Hearts and Beyond Social Services, which is helping needy families in Singapore, raising close to $30,000 for that as well. So I've seen this amazing demonstration of support and compassion as a result of COVID-19. My hope is that continues. We started off COVID-19, economy is doing well, business is doing well, making lots of money, very money driven, start of a bit more, unilateralism and protectionism creeping in, but, massive inequality. And now what we've seen is, a big compassion level and giving over the last 2 or 3 months. I hope that as we emerge, at least some of that continues. We don't go back to the bad behaviors. Certainly in areas that I'm working, like, for example, the construction workers, their dorms, improving the dorms, improving treatments, and getting, basic levels of pay and treatment. I mean, all that is moving in the right direction now as a result of COVID-19. I hope that will continue across the other areas as well. So yeah, I have a huge amount of optimism and hope that we will continue this compassion and unity post COVID-19.
I hope so too. I share that sentiment, Steve, for sure. I mean, right now we're experiencing the peak of COVID-19. What advice would you give some startups for during this period to survive?
Yeah. I mean, I've spent the last maybe 3 months just on this one subject. Most of the companies I'm working with, I've kind of gone beyond that. But what I've seen is, first of all, it depends on the stage of the startup. So very, very early stage startups, generally speaking, are not too badly affected because they're living on fumes already. They're hugely creative and don't have any resources. It might delay the plans by 6 or 9 or 12 months, but they will continue to hustle and survive. And the big companies that have already established, got big, deep pockets and got big investors and their scale, they'll be fine as well. Their revenue may be impacted, the EBITDA might be impacted. The companies that are really struggling are the ones that are sort of a series A to B, where they have been growing at 2 or 3 times per annum, and suddenly, the revenue disappears or reduces heavily, and you've started to load up on all this cost. And suddenly then the runway of cash goes from 18 months down to 2 or 3 months very, very quickly. And that's where, I guess I've been spending most of my time. So, and that's very much, you mentioned the word survival, it's around survival. And my, my focus has been, how do we help this company survive for the next 12 to 15 months? Given the fact that, we could have first, second and third waves, there's going to be the fiscal stimulus that's going to start to be removed is going to have a follow-on impact. So it's not going to go away. The health issues we kind of have a bit of a better understanding on now, and hopefully in 18 months or so we'll have a vaccine for that. But we're a little bit better at managing that now. But the economic consequences we haven't felt yet, and so startups need to think that kind of window, and ideally towards end of 2021. So how do you get cash for that? So what do you do in terms of reducing your costs? What do you, and there are some ways around that. If you are fundraising, then maybe you restructure your fundraising, so you don't go from a $5 or $10 million round, you go for a $1 or $2 million bridge round. You go to existing shareholders and say, look, the valuation is flat, or it's a 30% discount, and you don't quibble. You get the money in as quickly as possible. You take advantage, obviously, of any support from the government, and it's been amazing. In most of the countries, just the support, including Singapore. I mean, just the level of support financially has been just been amazing. But that will go, and so how do you then sustain yourself if you cut cost? And that may mean reducing salaries, or giving people forced holidays, or working 3 days a week, or and at worst case, obviously we've seen some headcount cuts with some tech companies in the region. And then how do you start to position yourself to kind of take advantage as we start to come out, and so not cutting too close to the bone if possible. So most of the companies I'm working with have been trying to engage their customers, listen to their customers, and look for new ways to maybe generate revenue in the short term to help with that survival process. So it is particularly challenging at the moment.
Right. Thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, it's difficult times for everyone, myself included. But maybe we can move on to the Q&A time as well. I see that there's a lot of questions from the audience. Again, if you have questions, please do put it into the Q&A. I see here one question that's quite interesting.
What's the one?
Quite a few, actually. But yeah, there's also a question from Lai. It says, great sharing, Steve. For each success like yours, there are also many failures. What advice would you give for those wanting to start up?
I think if you have the desire to build a business, don't be put off by the fact that 95% of companies fail. With every failure, there's an opportunity to learn from something. So I personally would advocate not delaying, particularly if you think about companies that, the big company brands today, which are thriving, from a tech point of view, people like, Airbnb or Instagram, or, there's a whole bunch of companies which were formed essentially during, the last crisis in 2008, 2009. You will see some companies starting now, which in 10 years' time will be, hugely successful unicorns from Southeast Asia or Asia. And so, I think we're going to see, some really, really exciting progress. And so I would encourage anyone thinking about startup to give it a go. I learned more in the first 2 years of PropertyGuru than probably in the previous 10 years of corporate life. Making up rules, making up as you go along, the opportunity to be creative, to have a big impact and change something and make something better, a problem better. I would encourage it. The only thing I would say is, choose something which is a big pain. Choose a problem which is a big problem, which there isn't a really good solution for today, and then try and fix that, and just stay fixated on that. Don't start with the technology or the solution. Start off with the pain and the problem, and then think, how can you best solve that problem? And spend time talking to the customers, other people, or people in that ecosystem, understand the challenges, and really, focus on solving that problem. Right.
Thank you. And I guess PropertyGuru kind of solved that problem for a lot of people looking for property. And we have a question here from, I'm assuming, a property agent called Chantel. And she says, what do you think is the future for property agents, with transactions happening independently of agents or completed through online agents?
Yeah, this is an interesting. So this is an interesting question. So thanks for that. I guess it's something which you read about and gets discussed about on a regular basis, and I've been answering kind of this question for the last 12 or 13 years. And to be honest, my answer hasn't really changed, because on day one when we launched PropertyGuru, there was always, oh, are you going to displace the agents? And the answer is categorically not, because if you think about buying your home, and I guess in Hong Kong and Singapore, for example, where you and I are, the price of that is huge. It's $700,000 or $1 million or more. Yes, you want to be able to be equipped, and so I guess what PropertyGuru set out to achieve is make the market more transparent and empower the consumer to make a more informed decision. Because previously they were relying on a property agent or property developer to tell them really what was the best. Now they have more information, they can make a better decision, they can do more research. But ultimately, if you're going to spend $1 million on your home, you're going to want to go to that property. Probably you're going to want to spend some time looking at it and talking and having some reassurance. And that's the role the agent plays. So I think the agent's role will change. It has changed, but is still critical in terms of hand-holding, navigating, and advising. So that changes the skill set a little bit. So now the agents of the future who will be successful will be equipped with data and tools to be able to advise their customers. They're going to be using online a lot more. They're going to be doing a lot more virtual viewings. I've seen some agents, I've been talking to some agents recently about how they're using virtual viewings, where they're guiding customers through, potential customers through the property, using video conferencing, using the 3D virtual tours and the fly-throughs to showcase that, but provide guidance, answer questions, and help with the decision-making process. So more focus on professionalism, customer services, tools and data, and digital tools and data to support that process. And so, I think the role of the agent will stay in place.
Right. And continuing on to this theme of PropTech, what do you think is the future of PropTech in Asia? Are regional governments and populations receptive to this? Asked Lloyd.
Yeah, no. So if you think about PropTech, it's a merging of property and technology, and so property is if you just think about the area that I know best, Southeast Asia, it's a $250 billion US dollar per annum marketplace. For real estate, and that marketplace in terms of technology and digital hasn't really changed that much in 50 years or so. And so there's a huge opportunity to improve the productivity, the transparency, the sustainability of property using technology across Asia. And so with COVID-19, one thing has happened, which I think is irreversible, is the digitization of everything. It's accelerated everything. And so I had an interview last week with Business Times in Singapore around construction and construction tech. And, this is around, construction is going to have to fundamentally change in the future, like the property industry is going to have to change in the future, and use digital a lot more in terms of, improving productivity, in terms of, how do you do social distancing? How do you, maybe increase productivity so not relying so much on people all in a very small space? And so I think there's opportunities across the whole value chain. When you think about research, data, and then financing of the purchase of the land, how you think about the design of that, maximizing the best use of that land, the sales, the marketing, the ongoing management of that whole value chain is open to technology playing a role in that. And so I see some really interesting businesses around, particularly B2B, SaaS businesses which are involved in these slices of the value chain, and it's a big enough pie that you can slice it. And so your customer may be a facilities management company, or it may be a financier to the property developers or the land bankers. So there are different elements of that value chain which are still open for increasing productivity and sustainability.
Right. So in terms of another question I'd say is, I guess you've invested in many different startups. Is there an instance where you had a failed investment and at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course. Unfortunately, you know, the laws of probability mean that startups are going to fail, and so so let me think.
So how did you deal with that failed investment? Did you maintain ties with the founders?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's unless it's something fraudulent. I mean, it's people make mistakes. The business doesn't succeed. I have to take some responsibility because I put some money in. I can help. So it's sometimes it just it doesn't. The timing isn't right. Sometimes the investor mentality is not right, but whatever. There are different reasons why businesses fail, and so I've one of the businesses, an e-commerce business in Singapore. I lost about 50% of my original investment. There's a content business where I lost 100% of my money. I've got probably 3 or 4 in the portfolio currently, really struggling, and I'm not sure whether they're going to survive or not. And all I can do is offer some help and support to that. But at the same time, PropertyGuru for the first investors to now is like 50 times on their money. My first investment, purely by luck, I hasten to add, was a 15 times on its money. So yes, there are some failures which turn out to be 0 or minus 50, minus 70%, but there are also some which end up being sort of 5, 10 or more times return on the money. The thing I would say though is that it's certainly my experience, it's patient capital. Generally speaking, it's 10 years from start to finish. And whether it's directly into a business or maybe even for a venture capital fund. So it's not for the people who are looking for quick returns and liquidity. It just takes time. It takes time to build a business. The businesses that are around today, which is successful, they're like overnight 20-year successes, right? They've taken 20 years or more to build today. So it just takes time, but can be bigger. So it takes longer than you expect, but can be bigger than you expect.
Yep. I definitely agree that people don't see the things under the iceberg, I guess.
Absolutely.
I've got a question here from Masumi Investor again. Thanks for sharing, Steve. Wonderful tips. You talked about choosing partners. In your own investing, aside from sector, what do you look for when you pick your entrepreneurs and management team? Says Miranda.
Yeah, so this is a subject that we spend a lot of time talking about at Wavemaker actually, and we had a call yesterday for an hour plus just on this one subject in terms of tracking various aspects of the founder and the founding team, and there's some simple stuff. There's a piece around professionalism, so the ability to articulate the pain, the solution, and how the company is going to grow, underpinned by some credible assumptions. I had one founder recently who was insisting that despite COVID-19, they'll be growing 3x, they're going to be doing 9 million this year. And I spent 6 weeks with him saying, I can't see how you can get past 2.8 million. And then, about a week or so ago, is now saying, well, maybe it's more like 3. And I think it's about, that level of professionalism is one piece, I think. I guess founders who are interested to work with people and be willing to be, coach and listen and debate rather than being closed off. So sometimes you give some feedback to some founders, they take it very personally, and that says, well, are they self-aware? Are they willing to learn and adapt long term if they can't, maybe take a little bit short-term feedback? I think, those are kind of some of the key things. I think, passion is obviously an important point. Are they really passionate about what they're doing? Which makes it in place to energy levels, because it's going to be a long journey. And if you're really not passionate about what the problem you're trying to solve, then really are you going to have the staying distance? And are you going to be able to raise future funding and be able to, bring on new customers and partners if that comes across? I think some big turnoffs are things like, too focused on valuation. Sometimes investors come in and they're a little bit too arrogant and say, look, we've got these 3 VCs all lined up, and if you don't come on board, we're going to go with one of these guys. The valuation is 20 million, take it or leave it. And then, 2 or 3 months later, they're still fundraising and haven't managed to raise, and it kind of backfires a little bit. So there's a little bit around humility and just being a little bit authentic in that approach. So those are some of the things I look for. And I guess so that's the founder team piece. I also, if possible, depending on what stage, right, if they're later stage, I also look at, can they actually build a team? Because quite often what we see is a founder is able to grow to a certain level, maybe it's 30 to 50 staff, and then they can quite often plateau. And they plateau because they end up being I struggle with this personally as well a little bit. They end up being a bottleneck. They're not delegating, building leadership teams out, and delegating and holding people to account out in the organization. So can they build a team? So quite often in those organizations, you see people coming in and going out, coming in and going out. So there's quite high churn in that first level leadership organization. That's normally the first warning sign. So versus, are they able to build that second in command? Because, to scale the company, you need to build a team. And you need to be able to delegate and have a leadership team that actually can function on its own without your involvement.
Right. And I have a question, I guess, from the more social impact space now. I'm heading a not very young impact business, but am reinventing our focus. How do we tap into the impact investor landscape? As unlike new impact business, we might not get that kind of attention. Aparna asked this.
Okay. Hi, Aparna. I know Aparna. Thanks for the question. I think, so it's a little bit less evolved today, particularly in Asia. But when I think about, so if this is around, I guess the question is around investment. I guess when I talk to any startup, whether it's impact or non-impact, about investment strategy, I always think about making sure that you've got a really strong pitch and positioning. Why is this business important today, now? And then thinking a little bit about, how much money do you actually need for the next sort of 2 to 3 years of growth, and then sort of build into that. And as part of that, think about, who's the ideal investor? What's the ideal investor that you want to help you achieve your key challenges over the next 2 years? And start to build then a list of investors. Now, some companies in the social space can be viewed as a venture company, and will clearly therefore be attractive to any venture VC company or angel investor. So they will be on the list. Increasingly, I see family offices allocating more money to impact, whether it's a CSR point of view or around, actually funding businesses in this space. And then there are a whole bunch of small funds focused on different areas. So, for example, focus on plastics, on agriculture. Agricultural tech companies quite often, they're dealing with very sort of social enterprise kind of businesses in rural countryside. So depending on the area of the sector, you can widen out that investor list, and then go out and talk to all of them at the same time and keep the momentum on. But if this is a real live issue today, Aparna, I'll be very happy to bounce off some ideas on that one. In terms of who you might talk to.
Awesome. I think you have someone that can help you now, Aparna, so that's great. There's also now a question on scaling, I guess. So Gerard asks, I enjoyed the snippets on the difficulties you faced in expanding to other markets. So looking back, what should be the criteria and approach in finding the right partners to work with in other countries, or finding the right management to run in other countries?
Yeah, I think the first lesson learned was not to run before you can walk and overstretch yourself. And so, as I mentioned before, rather than go to 10 countries, maybe go to 1 at a time and do a little bit more phased approach. That would be the first thing. The second thing, I guess if you have limited resource, then partnering can work. So, for example, what we did in Malaysia, we had a PowerPoint presentation, and that was about, and a dream of taking on an effective monopoly in Malaysia, who had been there for about 5 years before we were entering. And it was a hugely challenging task. And so we felt, well, what do we need to make this a success? And how do we differentiate? So we felt that, okay, coming into Malaysia from Singapore, we had some spillover effect from Singapore into southern Malaysia, to Johor and Iskandar. And the competitor we were fighting against was very strong in central Malaysia. And so then we also went to North Malaysia. We acquired a small business. It was 5 people. It was very, very small business, but they were like the market leaders there. And then we said, well, okay, how are we really going to address this? You know, how are we really going to address Malaysia, and particularly central Malaysia? And so we talked to a whole bunch of people, and one company in particular was a media company called Redbury Media, and I had numerous conversations with the CEO, and they took a risk. They said, okay, we're willing to give you a go, and they took a minority stake in our Malaysia business in return for equity on their media. And so they had 2 newspapers, Malay Mail and Malaysian Reserve. They had like TV station, Banana TV. They had the TV advertising indoors on elevators. They had cinema advertising, you know, Federal Express Highway advertising, KLA advertising. And so in return for a stake in a business which didn't really exist at that time, we got access to their media. And then, you know, 6 years later, they sold their stake and made a nice big return. So I think partnering can definitely work. And I think in terms of actually choosing people, there is no magic formula for this. I think even when you're a larger company and you maybe, you know, you've got a, you know, professional retained executive search organization, you know, you're putting people through their paces, you're doing background checks, you're doing panel interviews, you're doing behavioral questionnaires and psychometric testing and everything else. Fundamentally, you don't really know what someone's going to be like until they're actually on board. And so, you know, when we hired the CEO, you know, that was a key consideration for us. And so, you know, we had a transition process, you know, and we created a brand new role, and then over a period of 9 months, gave the incoming potential CEO the opportunity to get some, you know, build some relations, to get some wins on the board, and for us to get comfort this was the right person. But equally important was actually, is this the right company? Can I work with these founders or not? And so, you know, we were very fortunate with Harry from LinkedIn join us, and you know, and he's done an absolutely amazing job in the last 3 years, and it made my job very easy in terms of handing over. But of course, you know, both sides had risks, and so we kind of had to manage that risk over a period of 9 months. Now, I'm not saying you do that with every role, and that's kind of one extreme, but you can certainly think about maybe having, you know, extended probation periods, doing a lot more background checks. And my one tip would be not to rely on a search company to give you the references, because they'll give you the references from their best friends, which are glowing. The best references come through the back door, the ones where you get, I know someone who knows of this person, or worked with them in a company 2 or 3 years ago. And that's when you find out the real flags, and you see the real warning signs, which you can kind of drill down a little bit further on. But it's, as I mentioned earlier on, talent, hiring, retaining and developing people is the single biggest challenge for any startup, early days, including today. You know, there's a big talent war going on, and it's now a global talent war. You know, I remember us losing our mobile team, mobile app development team, to Facebook in the US. They basically pretty much poached the whole team and brought them to the US. Now what's going to happen, you know, in this, you know, this work from anywhere future is that, you know, it's an opportunity for starters because they can hire anywhere. It's also, you know, a challenge because I guess those people can also be poached from anywhere. But yeah, it's, we're living in interesting times, but that people piece is the hardest.
Right. Thank you for that, Steve. Really helpful and really insightful. I just also have a question from Leon. Maybe I'll summarize it a bit, but he's working on something that connects employers to maid agencies. I think the gist of the question is, what are some of the key factors to take into account for valuation, especially at early stage, and also what to look for in investors?
What's the last part of the question, sorry?
What to look for in investors as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so early part of the business, is that?
Yep, early stage startup.
Yeah,
so
okay. I think yeah, sorry, but I think the number one that I focus on is, what is the pain that you are solving? What's the problem that you're trying to solve for? You know, so, and then fixate on that. So even in our business, you know, PropertyGuru, when we're building PropertyGuru, it's like effectively two sides. You've got the buyers and the sellers, and you've got, you know, the consumers and the real estate agents and property developers. You know, you say, well, where are you really, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And then very clearly you say, well, actually, the big problem we're trying to solve is the consumers. We're trying to help the consumers navigate this highly complex process. So fixating on that, talking to the consumers, you know, innovating, experimenting, you know, talking to customers, trying things, getting feedback, focusing on that pain, and trying to solve that pain. You won't do it the first time, but you'll hopefully you'll iterate to get to solving that pain. And if you solve that pain, it's a big enough pain, your business will be a success, and you will be able to monetize, and you will be able to grow fast. But if you're not solving that a big enough pain, and the people who are suffering this pain see real value, that value creation that you're providing, you won't be able to do value capture. In other words, to monetize. So big pain, value creation, your solution can address the pain, and then you can kind of monetize that value creation. And so around valuations and I guess investors in the early stages of business, there is it's not an art or a science. It's a little bit around supply and demand. It's a little bit about negotiation. If you're super early stage, you know, your valuation could be anywhere between sort of $1 to $2 or $3 million. You know, if you have a little bit of traction, you might be sort of like $2, $3 to $7 or $8 million. So what drives that? In the early stages of business, when it maybe don't have much revenue or much history and traction, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. And if you've got 10 people interested in investing in your company, the valuation will go up. If you've got one person interested in investing in your company, the valuation is going to be lower. So the trick is, how do you, when you go into the investment mode, is not to do it half-hearted. You know, you've got to devote time to this, and you draw up your long list of all the potential investors in that universe, and you go to all of them at the same time, and you keep the traction and pressure on.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, later on, you can use discounted cash flow, and you can use valuation comps or comparables, which could be revenue multiples, like 10 times revenue or you know, 20 times profit. You know, later on, when you have a little bit more traction, maturity, then there's a little bit more science to it. But early stage, it's a little bit around, you know, negotiation and demand.
Right. That's an interesting point. For very early stage, I guess that is the art behind it. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I actually have a question here that's more related personally to you, and I guess work-life balance. So it says, "Hi Steve, you mentioned you were juggling between a full-time job and your new startup in May 2007. And you worked Monday to Friday on your full-time job while Saturday, Sunday on your startup. How do you manage your time effectively then, especially when you have a family?"
I think it depends on your personality. Some people are very good at balance. Some people are very good at multitasking. I am absolutely not. I do 150% on one thing, and I go all in, and I'm very competitive, and I focus on that one thing and do it to the extreme. So in the case of PropertyGuru, that's what I did. I worked 7 days a week, 14-hour days for the first 6 or 7 years. To the point where, you know, I didn't really see my kids growing up for the first 2 or 3 years. And that then ended up being the catalyst for, actually, this is not sustainable. I need to do something about this. So I think it depends a little bit on your personality type. For me, I'm not particularly good at multitasking and balance. And therefore, I just have to basically say, actually, what is my priority? And, you know, in 2015, going into 2016, I decided that my priority was to spend more time with my kids before they grow up and leave the house. And that then becomes, you know, my number one. So spending more time with my kids and my family ends up being my number one priority. And so that then led to, look, can I run the company in the way I run the company long term, and do this? And I came to the conclusion I can't, and therefore I have to change something fairly fundamental. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's been asked to run for a CEO role for a very large organization, and I had exactly this conversation around, you know, it depends on your personality. You know, he would say, look, he's really enjoyed working from home, really enjoyed working with his family, you know, spend time with his family and this kind of thing. At the same time, he really wanted to go for the CEO role and struggle with it and end up telling the chairman no. And then within 6 hours, reversing that decision and saying, yes, actually he wants to go for it. Because he felt, actually, you know, he's the kind of personality who can divide and manage and compartmentalize. I wasn't very good at that. So I think it depends on your personality.
Right. Thanks for that, Steve. I think it's very true. I also have this problem trying to balance that.
I'm terrible. Yeah, don't ask my wife that question.
There's a question here from DT, and maybe I'll rephrase it a bit as well. He asks, how does one get started in a small way to becoming an angel investor or be aware of investment opportunities? And I'll expand it a little bit. Maybe between social impact space and startups in technology. How would you say is the differences? Is there some channel or some website or something where they can get started?
I mean, this is, I guess, well, let's start off with the startup piece first. I think, you know, so if you are interested, there are some groups. I'm not sure if you're in Singapore or not, but I mean, if you're in Singapore, there's 3 or 4 angel syndicate and groups. You know, there's Angel Central, which has a group of about 300 or 400 members. I'm a member of that group. And typically people are investing anywhere sort of between sort of $10,000, $20,000 upwards. What they do is also around education. So every 2 or 3 weeks there's a education. Used to be face-to-face, now it's webinars, of course, but around, you know, the basics of, you know, doing due diligence, the basics of analyzing an investment, around valuing a investment, around managing a portfolio, basic angel startup 101. There's also other groups, She 1K, which is focused on women leaders who are now want to put a toe into angel investing. There's Bansi, Business Angel Network Southeast Asia. There's also Zooglers, or XA as they're called now, which is started up by a bunch of ex-Google guys. A very smart bunch of guys and women, and they are they've widened the net a little bit, so it's actually, it doesn't have to be ex-Google people now involved. And so there's some groups that get involved, and there's a whole bunch of resources. You know, whether it's, you know, E27 does some fantastic content. You know, the Ken does some fantastic content. So you could just, you know, through that process, go along, join, absorb through osmosis. You'll start to pick things up. And then maybe slowly just put your toe in the water in the business which you are completely blown away by, and go through the learning process and try. From a social impact point of view, you know, I went through this journey, you know, in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, and so I had a blank piece of paper pretty much. You know, I knew I wanted to learn about this space, and I spoke to associations like NVPC, National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. I joined the Asian Venture and Philanthropy Network, AVPN, and also you know, network with the guys from Tonic, which is impact investing. So there's a bunch of groups. There's a whole bunch of conferences. AVPN just ran their conference last week with the responsible investors running theirs this week. There's GIN, there's Tonic, separate groups running events. The FT, Financial Times, runs sustainability events. So there's a whole bunch of conferences going on. So that's another avenue. And what I also then did was started then just to reach out to companies that looked interesting. So ones which were on the social enterprise space and also sort of climate space, and just asked to have a coffee with people and to learn a little bit about what they were doing and understand the challenges they were facing. And through that process, along with talking to some of the big VC, sustainability, ESG funds, I kind of, you know, learned a little bit. You know, if you absorb yourself in something for long enough, you do start to become a little bit of an expert, albeit maybe a thin layer, quite broad. And so you can get some experience and build a network in that reasonably quickly.
Right.
But again, similar, I'll be very happy to share, you know, one-on-one if the individual wants a bit more, you know, wants to bounce some ideas off. Very happy to do that.
Sure. Unfortunately, Awesome. I was about to ask a question. What things are you looking to invest in? Maybe this is your time to say what you're looking for, and what sort of startups interest you at this point.
Yeah, I mean, my startups are around, you know, climate, anywhere around the climate and social impact space. My most recent investment has been with a company called SoulShare, which is a peer-to-peer in villages in Bangladesh, sharing solar energy and trading solar energy from house to house effectively, which is, I think, is a great business. Has grown really well, and they've got great opportunity to grow, not just in Bangladesh but outside of Bangladesh. Another company which I'm just in the process of finalizing a syndicate for is a company called Yuhu, which is around air quality, which on the face of it may not sound hugely interesting, but there's been a lot of research from a lot of the medical journals around links between air quality and COVID-19 and virus death rates. And so there are some factors contributing to higher virus death rates around air quality. And so this company is basically allows you to measure air quality and have a virus index, so you can see how at risk you are relative, to on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of virus susceptibility for virus spread and survivability. And so they're working with a whole bunch of large enterprises, like CapitaLand, CDL, and Frasers, and just an order from one of the sovereign wealth funds in Singapore, and a big, large Japanese bank. As people start to return to workplace, people want to go back to work in a healthy building, and this company is helping people return back to a healthy building and also save lives. There's some reviews on Amazon about people's lives being saved, or their father's life being saved as a result of identifying an issue around carbon dioxide levels or carbon monoxide levels in a room, and then allowing that to be addressed. So yeah, those are ones where I'm currently. Obviously, with COVID-19, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff around digitization and health, which is going to be change for the future. So obviously, healthcare, access to healthcare is going to be one key area. Digitization from a business point of view in terms of work from home, work from anywhere, collaboration tools. I think one of the things that I've experienced with working with startups is that they've managed quite well with existing technology to keep some kind of culture, some kind of performance and operations going, and actually even sales. Some of them using webinars and Zooms and practicing demo pitches and stuff. So actually, they've managed to innovate, experiment in this digital world. And I think tools that enable that and support that in a better way. Particularly, I think from a collaboration strategy kind of point of view. And so I think you can do a lot of stuff remotely, but brainstorming in a digital way is actually quite hard with different people in different places. And so I think there are the opportunities, I think, to support this work from anywhere, and also digital consumption just generally with consumers, whether it's entertainment, gaming. It's accelerated the adoption of all of that. I don't see that going back.
Right. Thank you very much, Steve, especially for all your time today. I'm just conscious of the time. It is close to the end of this session. So just wrapping up, Steve, what would you advise businesses right now and founders right now in this time?
Well, I guess the key thing for me would be, I think we're still living in an uncertain time. And whilst I think we're seeing some green shoots, stock markets doing really well, and that could lead to a little bit of over enthusiasm. And I would urge a little bit of caution. I don't think we're out of this yet. I think we've got another 18 months to go. And so I think, having a level of prudence still, and investors still are cautious. I mean, I've invested in a couple of companies in the last month, and Waymaker's invested in a couple of companies in the last month. Deals are still getting done, and quality companies are still getting financed, but it's taking longer, and I think that trend will continue. And so being a little bit prudent, I would encourage a little bit of prudence. So not cutting to the bone, but also at the other end, not thinking, right, we're out the woods now, let's just go full steam ahead. Because I think we'll have some second and third waves and economic waves still to come. So just to be a little bit cautious, I think.
Sure.
And of course, stay healthy. The virus is still around, and whilst businesses are opening again and everything's moving in the right direction, or seems to be, just to stay healthy, because the virus is still around, right?
Yep. That's very good advice. I use YouTube a lot for my fitness right now.
Yeah, same for me.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your time. I'm going to hand back the time to Koi. I think he's going to wrap up with a few points.
Right. A very big thank you, Steve and Benson, and everyone here for your active participation today. We received so many questions, and I think we didn't have time to finish answering all the questions. So thank you very much. And I hope you found the session to be meaningful and insightful to everyone. And before saying goodbye, we will appreciate if you could just scan the QR code on the screen and let us know your thoughts about today's session, or even just topics you'd like to hear in the future, so that we could cater the program better for everyone who is interested to attend. Well, thank you so much once again. And for those who are living in Singapore, congratulations on reaching phase 2. It starts today, and everyone's going out for dinner tonight. I heard, yes, Steve is going out for dinner tonight. So stay safe, keep well, all right, and goodbye and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks, Koi.
Thanks, Benson. Thanks, Koi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.